the last of our speakers series this summer, and we have such an interesting person, two interesting people here. We have Terry Lobdell and Von Meadows, and they're both going to give a very interesting talk about natural artifacts and native artifacts that were found in this area from colonial period and even before. So here's Terry. I'll let you take care of that.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, to start off with, I'm going to let Vaughn begin because she has the most interesting artifact, a pipe found right here at Canadola Lake. So, yeah, you could tell your story about
this. Yes, I could just pass this around for everyone to look at while I'm talking. This is the pipe right here. This was found in the Canadola Lake, Lincolnville area. Found it harvesting crops. It was encased in mud. Almost threw it out. I've added to the archaeologists in the Cleveland Museum, Mercyhurst College. They've all been dated 900 to 1100 years old. I was at an Indian artifact show. That's where I met Terry about 25 years ago. And there was an archaeologist that came up to me there with some students, and he looked at it and he gave me the same determination on it. And he said, but it's still considered lost unless it's documented. An Indian Artifacts magazine was there, and because he was there to authenticize it, and they took pictures, and it's been officially documented with being found here and stuff. When you look at them photos, on this side, on the right side, there's little lines here, and on the left side, there's a ring around it. You can see the different size drill holes where they made the pipe stem and the bowl and how they connect. It said that this is from the Whistler tradition, which is basically in northeast Ohio and somewhat in Pennsylvania. They had villages along the creek bottoms and stuff and streams, which made sense because this was found close to Oil Creek off of Canadola Lake. The word effigy means likeness, model, image, representation of something. Some of the earliest effigy pipes were almost always birds. Ducks, eagles, hummingbirds, woodpeckers, pigeons, owls, swans. And the later dates they progressed and added turtles, deer, beavers, frogs, and stuff like that. This is a steatite stone, which is found in the Appalachians, Canada. They're known to be this green-gray color with black speckling, and they have a good thermal quality. There's the pipe makers, which they thought of this creation and took hundreds and hundreds of hours that you can imagine to carve this with the saws and files and drills and polishing, and they would boil it and use beeswax to bring out the color. And unlike the flint quarries with the arrowheads, there is no records of any pipe foundries. There are very few individuals that made these pipes, and they weren't just for decoration. They were had significant symbolic meaning with clan, spirit, ancestor, whatever they were thinking of. The pipe carrier stored the pipe and other sacred objects in animal pouches. But he would be the host of the ceremony, and they would have prayers to the 7 points, which northeast, southwest, above and below with the spirit world, and Mother Earth who is the center of all living things. They often use a wooden stem, usually ash or a reed, that could be up to 1.5 feet long on these pipes. They smoked Nicotiana rustica, which is basically wild tobacco. They were only used in ceremonies, not for recreational use. And the pipe, when they passed it, either people just touched it or they smoked out of it. It was used to communicate with powers of the universe, a conduit for prayers. They asked blessings, seek guidance, vision quests, healing ceremonies, rites of passage, totems, guardian spirits. They were also used in funeral rituals. With a primary source between humans and the spirit world for their entities, which would be their gods and ancestors. The smoke carried the message of prayers and spirits. Sometimes the pipe was given away after a funeral ritual, but they were always, if it was a very high-ranking person, the pipes were often what they called killing of the pipe, where they would intentionally break it and put it with the burials, and it symbolized releasing the spirit of the pipe. With this broken beak, it's been debated whether the pipe maker messed up making the pipe and threw it away, or whether it was damaged in the field, with a rototiller plow or whatever. And that's about it. Anybody got any questions?
Did you find it, or?
Yes, I found
You
it.
found it, really?
Where exactly?
I'm not going to say.
Tell about how it was on the belt, the conveyor belt.
No.
Okay.
You think there's some other things there, is that what you're thinking?
It's
It's
just
a privately owned area, and
It's
they're not gonna want tons of
just-
people going in there.
Tramping around, okay.
kind of a private thing that just I'm not going to say.
Have you personally smoked anything through that?
Yes. Ceremonial before deer hunting. Bring on the spirits.
Yeah.
You asked.
And what kind of tobacco were you using?
Good kind.
Thanks, Vaughn.
One more question. Did you have some idea what that was when you found it, or not until somebody identified it?
It was pretty encased in mud, and I just kind of like, but it felt different, and I brushed off some of the mud, and I knew it was a pipe. And I took it home, and it was a few days cleaning it. It was pretty encased, almost like cemented in.
When you smoked, what did you use for a stem? Did you
Ash,
went and drilled it out? or
ash
something?
drilled out, and then another time, turkey leg was hollowed out. Oh yeah, they hollowed out a turkey leg. That was harvested on our farm, and used that.
When I was a kid, we had some gravel come to our driveway, and it looked like a Cheerio, but it was stone. And I always thought it must have been part of a necklace or something.
There's
looked
been
like-
some found
It looked like
around
a
here.
Cheerio, only it was rock.
Could be, it could have been a crinoid too, which is a fossil of an ancient sea life, like a type of coral. Sometimes those will end up as a ring, looking like a bead, but I can't
I
see.
mean, it was smooth as glass, you know what I mean?
Okay, it might have been a bead, because they like to camp on gravel. Gravel soil was well drained, it was always dry, so
Yeah.
gravel ridges were always ideal campsites. On the subject of a load of gravel, probably 20 years ago, when they were doing the sand replenishment out of Presque Isle, Jerry McWilliams up in the area, he found a mammoth tooth
Yeah.
that came from Waterford, gravel pit in
Yeah.
Waterford. It's on display at the Tom Ridge Center.
Our son found a mammoth, on the shores of Lake Erie in the cliff up by Northeast.
When was that?
When was that?
Late 1980s, probably early 1990s.
An entire skeleton?
No,
No.
no. It's a,
A tooth?
no, it's a bone. It's
A
a
bone.
bone about
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what.
Do you
what-
guys still have it?
Mm.
Yeah, have you showed that to anybody from,
Biology teacher
I would,
at Union City. I don't know if we've shown.
I would
anywhere
take
else.
that to Mercy.
Did you show it to, Scott Speedy?
I'm not sure.
We had a brother-in-law, he was an archaeologist.
Oh, okay.
And,
But sometime after that, I'm gonna say within 5 years of him finding that, he's just a kid. Just says, look what I found. And it's obviously, you know, the way it's porous, but
Yeah.
obviously old bone. And it wasn't, I think within about 5 years, like, he found it in Northeast. East of there in New York State, they found an entire skeleton. But we always say, but it was missing one bone.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, one of the most complete mammoth skeletons ever found in the United States came from Lake Pleasant in 1991,
Yeah.
and by George Moon.
All right, well, yeah, we've heard all about the,
Yeah, that was all, yeah, they had
Yeah,
the thing with the sea wolves,
sea
yeah.
wolves,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Our brother-in-law always, he would, make, petrified dog teeth necklaces for our kids, and,
they weren't petrified, they were just.
and shark teeth that they would dig up. They always give them to the kids.
yeah, it's, yeah, there are still bones of megafauna in our area, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And to add on to what Vaughn was sharing about her pipe, I found a turtle effigy pipe in 1999 near Townville behind my house. It's broken in half, so, and I would like, what Vaughn had researched, I was told this was likely broken in half on purpose. Appears to be a painted turtle. 5 years before that, I found a partially completed pipe in the same field where they evidently broke the stem when they were drilling out the stem and just threw it away. And then 4 years after I found the base in this fragment, I did find the stem, and it's drilled about half an inch and obviously broken a bit. Yeah, so, and what I'm going to talk about today, there's 14,000 years of human occupation here in Northwest PA. I won't be able to cover it all, so probably what I'll do, give like an overview, and then maybe the last hour, you can ask questions, and then we can talk more specifically about what you're interested in. Also, real quick, so I don't want to forget. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Yeah. So when I was a little kid, I thought it'd be the greatest thing to go back in time. And if you want to go back in time to the colonial or the Eastern Frontier period for art, get any books by Robert Griffin. He's without a doubt the best artist of the Eastern Frontier, mainly French and Indian War, Revolutionary War. If you go down to Fort Pitt Museum in Pittsburgh, they have murals throughout the entire museum. They're done by Robert Griffin. He's from Linesville. I just got his most recent book out there at our archaeology club show, July 26th. But and a lot of you may have seen his paintings. He does He's got paintings of the various forts at the Point, at the Triangle in Pittsburgh, Fort Duquesne, Fort Pitt. But yeah, Robert Griffin. And then if you want to read books, and Vaughn just told me she has all of Alan Eckert books.
Yeah.
I only have two. I have Wilderness War and I have Dark and Bloody River. But these are like going back in time. And it has stuff that happened around here. That's what makes it really interesting, is you can see what it was like around here in this area. Because when I was a little kid, I was always told, well, Indians just traveled through this area. Yeah, in the 1800s they did, occasionally from the reservations up in New York, but there's more to history than just the 1800s. And that brings me to the main time periods. The 14,000 years I'm talking about, the oldest would be the Paleo time period, which is about 4,000 years long from when the glaciers started to melt about 14,000 years ago. By 10,000 years ago, the glaciers were gone. That was the beginning of the Archaic time period, which was 7,000 years long. Probably most of your arrowheads or points that you find, they're from the Archaic time period because, it's 7,000 years long. These are hunter-gatherers. Then the most recent time period is a woodland, which woodland time period just means agriculture. This was when they were growing squash, beans, and then later corn. Corn was a kind of a recent arrival, definitely within the last 1,000 years. Pottery is also a recent arrival. Sometimes pottery, it could be out in the field and you won't even recognize it. You'll find pottery. These are fragments. Behind my house, I always look at woodchuck holes and uprooted trees. Many years ago, I saw an uprooted tree. It was after I found the pipes, so I was taking a closer look at everything. I found a fragment sticking out of this uprooted tree, took it to my archaeology club meeting, and they confirmed it definitely was pottery. So I went back, dug into this tree root a little bit. Some bigger shards fell out. This is a rib shard. And if you hold it up to the light slightly, you can see two C-shaped indentations where the maker, they used a coil method. She pressed her fingers in to compress the coils. You can see two fingernail marks. And I can't say 100% sure that's what they are, but other people have told me that is very common to see fingernail. And in the bottom, a lot of these vessels they'd have a conical base, so they would set them right in the coals of their fire to heat up. And they said in the bottom you could see finger thumb prints. They said it's very common. So, yeah, the more you observe artifacts, even the broken ones, they tell a story. It's like putting together puzzle pieces. And unfortunately, a lot of the sites, the mounds are destroyed. I know between Meadville and Cockerton, another gold mine of information, if you can get a hold of it, is a history. This is a history of Crawford County. Every county in the state has one. This was probably an original copy from 1885 that they have reprints for genealogy, local history, and even there's a chapter on Native Americans. It's a gold mine of information. All the bottomlands in this area, they had mounds everywhere, and those were destroyed for agriculture, unfortunately. But because there's been so much archaeology done in the last 100 years, now with the internet, you can find a point and go online and just get hundreds of pages on that cultural affiliation. And an example here, I've got this point in the lower corner. I'm 90% sure this is a Lamoka type, and was a common point type for this area. I only found it 2 years ago. I got online, and there was link after link of the Lamoka culture. It peaked between 3,500 years ago and 5,500 years ago, mostly based in New York State. There's a lot more lakes then. These people, they did a lot of fishing, and it also said they're heavy consumers of nuts. So I thought that was interesting because behind my house, there's these large boulders that have these pits. They're golf ball, they're about golf ball size. They're pretty shallow. They're all on sloping surfaces of boulders. I was told they would process nuts there. So that made sense that maybe that point I found was associated with people that were back there processing the nuts. And that area behind my house, it's also near where I found the turtle pipe. It has a gently sloped hillside, not even a hillside, it just slopes downhill to a small stream. And for acorns and bitternut hickory, they have tannic acid, so they would put them in a net and take them to a stream and just suspend them in the water for a period of time to leach out the tannic acid, take them back up, grind them down, and make all kinds of stuff out of the flour. And I go back there, I can picture little kids, having these nets of nuts, taking them back and forth to the stream. There's also really good springs back there, which even in dry weather, they gush forth with a lot of water. So anytime you find a spring, Indians, they camp there at some point, especially when you consider during the Archaic period, they're on the move all the time. There's no agriculture, so they'll go someplace, stay there a week or 2 or 3 weeks, then they move on. Part of the reason for that would have been, imagine if anybody that burns wood, not having a chainsaw to get your firewood, just having stone tools, which I have a few here. I was lucky enough to inherit a lot of my great uncle's tools. He farmed with a team of draft horses near Townville. This is a nice celt made out of granite. You can see this is pretty heavy, so this is what they chop their wood with. So that's probably one reason why they probably deplete the firewood in one area, then they move on. So more on the time periods. I actually made a flow chart because I could get off track easily. 14,000 years. My first point was given to me by my grandfather. I was about 12 years old. It's this white point right here. It's a Hopewell. I've since learned it was a Hopewell point. And when he gave it to me, he said, boy, if it could only talk. Back then, in the late 60s, early 70s, nobody knew anything about this stuff. There's no internet. There were books, but it was hard to get a hold of any that were, they had a lot of information about our artifacts in this area. But since then, I've learned this is the big wide gaps for the stem. That's typical of Hopewell points. This is a Hopewell point there. I only have one. And interestingly enough, all 3 of my Hopewell points are white flint, which comes from Ohio. The Hopewell Indian or culture, that was an Ohio-based culture. They're the ones that have the really sophisticated mounds. And if you go further back in time, you have the Adena mound builders. And the Adena culture, they're the ones that made the Serpent Mound in southern Ohio. And the Serpent Mound is probably the most famous mound in Ohio. I was there once. These are other points that I found behind my house. This is actually an Adena point there. This is probably a stem knife. I found these. Notice the similarities between this and this, the stem. Found them in the same field, so it's probably the same culture. If you can find the base of a point, that's the main way that they identify that type. and cultural affiliation. Another thing I never realized years ago is that they resharpen points a lot. So most of the points that you find, they've probably been resharpened a few times. So, after I found, I used to look for arrowheads, but then in 1994, I found the one pipe in the field behind my house, and I realized, okay, there had to have been a campsite here if I found a pipe. So I did more looking. I started going to the French Creek Archaeological Society club meetings, which I did print a bunch of handouts, and they made copies. That's our most recent newsletter. We have monthly meetings. There's not going to be an August meeting, but there will be a September meeting. And Dr. Richard Michael Gramley is going to be the speaker there. He's the director of another organization that's actually nationwide. It's Association for Amateur Archaeology. He's an expert on megafauna, mammoth and mastodons, and he used to live in New York State. He's dug a ton of Iroquoian sites in New York State. He actually published my turtle pipe in his journal a few years ago. So this guy I've seen a lot of good speakers in my life because I have a lot of different interests, and if you ever get a chance to see this guy speak, thank you. He is an excellent speaker, and he comes to our meetings once or twice a year, and he's going to be speaking about mammoth and mastodon in some of the digs he does in Tennessee. This is one of the. He published it. I've got about 15 of these journals here. He used to publish 2 of these a year. This is from one out in Washington State. These are actual size. They're 2, one's the front, one's the back. They found in an irrigation ditch, they found these huge blades. Long story short, what happened was they're like 3 feet down. And about 9,000 years ago or so, these Indians, they left a cache of these blades under a sled that was made out of mammoth rib bones and hide. They covered it up and they buried the whole thing with rocks. And when they dug the irrigation ditch, they found these. And so this is one of my favorite issues. But he's got a lot on paleo artifacts. He's also published books. This is the most recent book, but he does a lot of digs up in New York State. Just a fascinating guy. So if you want to hear him speak, the meeting's at Cambridge Springs in September. I'm definitely going. An important point that I should make when I'm talking about these time periods, the archaic time, these are basically hunter-gatherers, but the hunter-gatherer lifestyle was also a characteristic of the woodland period and the paleo period. They were still on the move. There were seasonal camps, even during periods when they had advanced agriculture. An interesting thing about the paleo time period, there's a lot of art, and I had a t-shirt that shows these Indians spearing this mammoth with spears, and that's it's a popular misconception that megafauna was surrounded by 20 Indians with these giant spears. Dr. Gramley, he studied dozens of mammoth and mastodon skeletons. He said the way they brought down those animals was they would sneak up behind it and whack it and cut the Achilles tendon, and the animal would be crippled. That's how, he says, all the skeleton where they've been butchered, they've got those chop marks on the back of their foot where they're whacked with something. And I actually got to go to one of the kill sites in Ohio about 5 years ago. A farmer was doing some backhoe work. This is actually, it was not far from Newark, Ohio, where the Hopewell, the Newark Mounds are. But we got to see the mastodon bones, and they also found a jawbone at that kill site of a Megaceros, which, are any of you here familiar with the Irish elk from, used to be in Europe? It was an ancient, it's like a bigger version of our elk. It had the antlers had a span of 10 feet, if you can believe that, but that's fact. They, actually, this poster here, this is actually what our area would have looked like at the end of the last ice age. And I believe that's a Megaceros there. But the taller elephants are mammoth. And then I think there's some mastodon were much, they were shorter and squattier. Another thing that I learned recently was in northeastern United States, mastodon outnumbered mammoth 10-1, believe it or not. Even though, you know, we found lots of mammoth remains in northwest PA, and you can differentiate, the teeth are vastly different. They can identify what it was, whether it's a mammoth or a mastodon, just by the teeth. Mammoth were grassland grazers. They like savannas, vast grasslands, where mastodons were forest-dwelling animals. They like, and they also think that mastodon were very aquatic because their fur, what little amount of fur they found is hollow. So they think that mastodon liked wet, marshy areas, and they were browsers. So the browsers have a completely different tooth structure than the mammoth who ate grass. And it's thought that the mammoth, as after the Ice Age, once these savannas became forested in, that's what caused the end of mammoths. And they think overhunting is what caused the end of mastodon. Oh, and there's a short-faced bear there, and that thing, short-faced bear is the biggest predator to ever live. I know for sure North America, probably the Western Hemisphere, was an absolutely massive bear. I remember they're like 6 feet tall to shoulder. They had the long legs so they could run down prey on these vast plains. And one of the sites that I follow on Facebook, if you're on Facebook, there's a ton of really good archaeology pages. Probably the best one is the Ohio Valley Archaeology page. And they've posted where they actually found remains of a short-faced bear in Ohio. So if they're in Ohio, they're around here for sure, which that's amazing to think that the Indians around here would have encountered something like this. Another thing that they found in Ohio were giant sloth. I don't know, they were like 2,000 pounds. I don't know if this has a picture of them. Then that's the American lion, which was, it looked like an African lion, but it was a lot bigger. As far as saber-toothed tigers, I'm not sure. It seems like I recall West Virginia, they found remains of a saber-toothed tiger, but I can't remember how old that was dated to, and actually where exactly it was. Yeah, so the Paleo time period is really interesting because for 4,000 years, people around here, they lived in the presence of megafauna. Our club president, John Seitz, he used to be the superintendent of the game farm over on 408. He got called to the Riverside golf course several years ago. They're digging a pond, and there were mammoth rib bones down in there. And he also saw wood chips from prehistoric beaver which is another megafauna that the prehistoric beaver weighed as much as 300 pounds. If you can imagine a beaver that size. So, yeah, that's, so the paleo is probably, might be the most interesting time period because it was so different. And because of the megafauna, and these are an example of paleo points. And people wonder, well, how could you tell how old a point is and stuff like that? There have been thousands and thousands of digs done throughout the United States, and you know, when they date these, whatever method they use, they find certain types of points. Around megafauna bones, this is what they find. They find these fluted points. A lot of them are pretty big, really finely made points, and that's the only place you find them, is these really older sites. These are worth a lot of money. I know I was told if you find one that's like 5 or 6 inches long, they're worth $6,000 to $8,000 a piece. There's a young guy just last year, 2024, found one almost as big as this white one near Miller Station in Cambridge Springs. And he brought it to our show, and he was told if he sold it, it would be worth at least $750, maybe $1,000. Buying and selling of artifacts is a controversial thing because professional archaeologists believe it contributes to looting, which it probably does, but on the other hand, private collectors, they curate a lot of artifacts. And the universities and museums, they do not have the space or the time to curate priceless artifacts. And sometimes a private collector can do a better job protecting certain artifacts than a museum can. And both Vaughn and I, we're in a situation, we don't, you know, we're not gonna live forever. What are we gonna do with our pipes? I'll probably pass mine on to my daughter, but, you know, each generation, they, you know, is gonna probably value it less, and who knows what's gonna happen. You know, sometimes you could sell something to a collector. A collector might do a better job of preserving that artifact in a museum, because museums, they lose stuff all the time. Stuff gets stolen. They go through different staff. Museums have boxes and boxes of priceless artifacts in their basements. Yeah, so I don't know. It's a difficult question.
Yeah, I've been offered quite a bit of money.
So, yeah, I'm running out of time, so I should talk more about the other time periods. And I have samples, maybe towards the end, you can come up and get a better look at this stuff. Because before I joined the club, I mean, I was 34 years old. I'd been looking for over 20 years for stuff, and I had no idea. I thought when they made a point or something, it was a random process. It's not at all. Almost all points have a specific shape. Like we're talking about bifurcated points. And a bifurcated point, it has, well, they have the stem has 2 little tails, so it's got like a V. Almost all those are serrated, and I was told that because they're used as knives. Another interesting thing about the bifurcated points is, let's see if I have, okay, here. This is one here. This frame was given to me, but I was told it came from Muddy Creek. Almost all these bifurcated points, one side of the blade is concave, the other one's convex. One's rounded and one's indented. Almost all of them are, and maybe that was part of its function as a knife. But yeah, there's all different kinds, and that's not a random process. They're made that way purposely So even though, people think that these cultures were primitive, they didn't have the technology we have today, obviously, but they were very sophisticated in what they knew about their environment, the plants and materials that they used, and how they existed. This chart over here is, that's a chronological chart from older to newer. I should also mention the copper culture. In Michigan and Wisconsin, you can find chunks of copper everywhere in those states. And the Indians they would heat that up and hammer it into all kinds of artifacts. Basically, anything that they made out of flint or stone, they also made out of copper, from points to celts and axes, scrapers, knives. One of our club members, about 20 years ago, he brought a copper point that he found between Meadville and Franklin with his metal detector, which nowadays, I follow a couple metal detector pages. If you have a metal detector or are thinking about that would be a really smart thing to get into nowadays, because there's a lot of pages online where people show what they find. So you can get a lot of information on what you find. The same guy that also found the copper point found a site along French Creek where he found square nails and trade beads. And he's like, okay, square nails, trade beads, this is probably an Indian house. And the Delaware, or Indian, or Lenape, as they are pushed westward, for a while they lived around Meadville. And they would build a crude cabin. It wasn't as big of logs as what Europeans lived in around here, but they would make a crude cabin. They would use square nails. So that was probably an Indian house that he found. I've never found any trade beads. I know places like War, they find them over there. I know a guy that's found them along Cusawago Creek, north of Meadville. Let's see. Another interesting point related to going back in time with these two books. When we go through school, or in this area, growing up as kids, we watched a lot of Westerns. So the settling of the West is roughly from 1800 to 1900, a 100-year period. That's mainly what we learn about. But the settling of the East is from 1500 to 18. You got 300 years of European and Native American interaction here that we learn almost nothing about. And that reminds me of another book that I forgot to bring. I can't even think of the title now, but there's so much that went on here. And back to that statement people used to tell me, oh, Indians just traveled through this area. Well, in the summer of 1779, I'm actually ahead of the woodland period here. I'm in the historical period, which is after 1550. Summer of 1779, George Washington sent two armies up. He sent a huge army up the Susquehanna into New York State. They burned 40 Iroquois villages throughout New York. He sent another army under General Daniel Broadhead up the Allegheny. And between what is now Franklin and the New York State line, they burnt and destroyed 500 acres of corn. So 500 acres of corn, that's a lot of corn. That's just in one summer. That's how many Indians were living along the Allegheny River between Franklin and New York State just that summer. And on that same March, near Cockerton, they burnt 36 abandoned Indian houses. And this is during the Revolutionary War, and the Indians, they were coming down and raiding. So that army, and the one, Vaughn probably knows all about this because she's relevant, that Sullivan's March up the Susquehanna is detailed in this book. And it is riveting because, believe it or not, one of the villages in New York State, the Iroquois villages, was indistinguishable from a white man's village at that time. They had frame houses, they had horses, cattle, wagons, pigs. They had incredible orchards and gardens. And he describes in detail the vegetables. It wasn't just corned beef and squash. They had peach orchards, apple orchards, all kinds of other vegetables, stuff that in the book is described as being, you almost wouldn't believe it, but having been involved in organic gardening, I know you can grow some pretty impressive vegetables if you do things a certain way. But there were a lot of Indians that they had assimilated into the white man's style, and you can see that when you look at Robert Griffith's art, because in the 1700s, a lot of the fur bearers, they were gone from unregulated trapping and hunting. So the Indians, they wore trade cloth. And they were kind of like, they had some of their Native American style, but they wore trade cloth. And a lot of them, that one village I was telling you about, or town, it had a little town square. It was laid out like a white, white people's village would be like for that time period. There was actually a stone house that had window boxes with flowers. And these are Iroquois Indians. A lot of them had been Christianized, and they had adopted the white man's ways because they saw the superiority of metal, brass kettles, guns, but they destroyed that village as well. So, these are a gold mine. The historical time period starts about 1550. That's where, in archaeology sites, you start to see trade beads, you see metal, you see stuff that they got from Europeans. And an interesting thing about trade beads is, that brings me to two of the journals that Dr. Grayley published about. This is near Buffalo, New York. The trade beads changed. Certain styles changed throughout the colonial period. And if you find enough trade beads at an archaeological site, you could date it within about 25 years. So this one site, they found a lot of trade beads, and they were able to date that site between 1620 and 1640. Another interesting thing about that site was there was a high number of child burials, higher than usual. So why was there so much infant and child mortality? So they looked through the historical records, and in 1634, there was a severe smallpox epidemic that swept through the Iroquois in New York State. And so they figured that's what those child graves are from, is that smallpox epidemic. And some of my friends actually got to go up there. This is a sketch of a metal tomahawk they found. But a lot of these digs, they'd videotape them and then we would watch them at our. That's some of the pottery from New York State. I know they found rib shards of ornate pottery. I think this style in rock shelters above the Broken Straw Creek, right out near Spring Creek. This stuff has been found around here too. One of my friends, he was digging a grave, and it's illegal to dig graves, but what was happening was, the one site was near the Hamburg Fairgrounds, and they were gonna put a parking lot there, and there were Indian graves, so they had to be moved, and that's one of the graves. One of the child burials had a ceramic duck. It was right up like the child was buried holding that. And I think it was probably, you know, a toy for that kid that was buried. Yeah, it's amazing. On the subject of metal detecting, one of the sites that Dr. Gramley dug on was in Pensacola, Florida, right in the city. I believe it was Pensacola. Long story short, they found stuff from one of Hernando de Soto's camps. He was a Spanish explorer that discovered the Mississippi River. And Dr. Gramley got to dig that. That was a bracelet they found there. And it was confirmed as one of de Soto's campsites. So, I mean, to get to hear this guy speak is amazing. Let's see, time-wise. Look at my... There's one old guy that he's passed away. Now, I gotta mention him. You know, he had no professional credentials, but he had hours walking the fields. And he said when he was a little boy, grew up in Newcastle, PA, they're dozing off a field behind his house for a ballpark. He walked out there, saw a triangle point. Those are the small, give you an example of, up here I've got a row. A triangle point is a true arrow point. Saw a triangle point, like this top row, these are triangle points. They're like 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch long. Those are the true arrow points. That's what you really find a lot of on village sites where there's long houses, pottery. He reaches down to pick it up, and behind the base of this point is a long, dark streak in the soil. And that was what would be called the shaft wound. That was where the wood shaft had laid in the soil, decomposed, and left, they call it a mold. Around village sites, they find post molds where the post was sunk in the ground, and the soil it's all decomposed and it's a different color. It's, you know, the wood rots away, it fills in with leaves and organic material. So he found a shaft mold. He said at that point he was hooked. So he became an avid collector, had up to 5,000 artifacts. They got stolen somehow. Somebody broke into his house. So he was depressed, gave it up. Then he got back into it, and he was I knew him for about 20 years until he passed away. But the way I would describe this guy, he could drive down the road, he could read the topography of the land like we read a book. And he said one time he's driving down the road, he saw a freshly plowed field. It was on that first rise above a stream. He's like, oh, they camped there for sure. He got out, got permission from the property owner. He said he found like 35 points in just a couple hours. And another interesting thing he'd always say is, at the end of the last ice age, as the glaciers receded, all the valleys around here, they were still filled with ice. So you had this plateau where, as the first people came into this area, it's all flat, it looked like the tundra, and he said those springs on upper elevations, that would have been those would have been the earlier paleo sites. So he would drive around to high elevations in Crawford County and look for these springs out in fields, and he'd look for paleo. And he said he would find, I don't think he ever found any complete ones, but he'd find bases and broken pieces. So he was an interesting guy to talk to, just because of his knowledge. Did I talk about the Lake Pleasant Mammoth? Yeah, okay. Sometimes we get speakers on forts, and this is coming up to the historic time period. We had a speaker on Franklin. There were 5 different forts at the French. They called it Fort Machal, and when the British took over, they called it Fort Venango. There's actually 5 different forts down there. There's actually been a lot of digs done in Franklin. They have some mini cannons that they dug up, and that was a really interesting talk. There is a Venango County Archaeological group too. I think they still meet. I've never gone to any of their meetings. But let's see. One other interesting artifact. I have a celt here. As far as I know, it was found by my great-grandfather near Little Cooley. And it appears to be a soft stone, and it's highly polished. The blade end appears to be dulled, and it's kind of it's digged up here on this one side, and you notice that these are called peck marks from when they would pound something. It has a certain this percussion tools, and that's one way you can differentiate whether it's an artifact or it's a natural stone. You'll have a combination of a high polish patina, and then there's also damaged areas where they're striking something. This area is off center, and if you look at it, well, why is it off to one side? But if you hold it in your right hand, your fingers cover. This is not damaged because the tool user's fingers were there, so he's using it like that. Probably might have been breaking open bone to get bone marrow. The celt is another multi-purpose tool. You know, they use it to cut things. They would use this end as a pestle. Native Americans also abuse their tools, just like we do sometimes. I know I've used a chisel as a screwdriver, and I've used screwdrivers as chisels. I've got some broken celts where I found just the top, and you can see where it's all digged up where they're doing this, and it just snapped, it broke. This also has some staining, so at some point I might see if I could get, I could get a chemical test done to see if there's plant residue or who knows what, because nowadays with the technology, these are like upwards of 10,000 years old. They actually did tests, and they determined, even though blood would be long gone from these blades, there is some chemical process that they could actually tell what kind of blood was on these blades thousands of years ago. And he describes that in there. Yeah, if you want to ask questions, or did anybody bring stuff to be identified? On the subject of closer observation of artifacts. This, of all the points that I have, and point or arrowhead's kind of a general description for artifacts, but the arrow points probably only make up maybe as little as 10% of what you'll actually find out there. Probably half of them are scrapers and drills. The bigger points are probably knives. And because flint is a sharp, you would want to save flint breaks easily, so you'd want to save it for skinning. And probably the majority of their projectile points were bone and fire-hardened wood, which actually would have made up the majority of their projectile points. So most of the bigger points, like these, are probably knives. This one was always interesting because I was out in the field, and right now it looks kind of blue, but when I saw it in the ground, it looked green. I honestly thought I was picking up a broken piece from a Coca-Cola bottle. That's what it looked like laying on the ground. I thought, a piece of glass there. I thought, I'll pick it up to make sure it's not anything, and it turns out to be this. And the base was busted off, but there's enough of the base there that I could, I'm 90% sure it's what's called a Jack's Reef point. So, and I was wondering, okay, why is it's got an odd shaped point. It's kind of pentagonal. And I thought, okay, was it made that way? Or did they was it longer and they broke it off and just resharpened it? Because they did resharpen a lot of their tools. So since the Ohio Valley Archaeological page has been on Facebook, I've since learned that Jack's Reef points, almost all of them are pentagonal. They have a pentagonal shape. So why? I don't know. It's maybe that guy from Missouri that has the ballistics chart would know why that is, but yeah, and I had no idea about that until like maybe just in the last 2 years. This is a little bifurcate point that I found behind my house a few years ago. And interestingly, these are supposed to be really old. Almost every chart that I've seen about the bifurcated points, they're like 5,000 to 8,000 years old. This one here that's really blooded, that was probably heavily resharpened down. I found that making the lawn at my parents' house. This one, my ex-wife found that the edge of a cornfield. We're out picking blackberries, and I heard her screaming, I found one. And then she's like, you put this there, didn't you? I go, no, I did. She found it. And it's really dull. And it's in the same field where I found the turtle pipe. That was probably discarded. It's kind of a dull point. That was a little triangle point not far away. And that was probably, they probably shot an arrow and lost it. And this is a triangle point that I found, of all things, digging it. I had a ditch shovel, which is a little narrow shovel. I was digging a ditch about 6 inches wide through a yard to bury an electric cable. And boom, there's this nice triangle point. Like, it's weird how I found a lot of stuff I find, not even looking, it's just by accident. And then when I go out and actually looking, I don't always find anything.
Terry, did you look at our,
I did.
and is there anything exciting there?
Oh yeah, like, in eastern Pennsylvania, they find the white ones almost look like they came from eastern Pennsylvania. This one, I'm not sure. A lot of times the pink flint, it's from heat treating. A lot of the pink flint was white flint that they put it in the fire, so it's a lot easier to flint now. This one, I'm not a lithics person. Some of the more basic ones I know, like the black flint, the black shiny flint comes from Coshocton County, Ohio. The gray flint, especially if it's nice quality, comes from upstate, about 300 miles from here, up in New York State. This might be from Ohio. The Flint Ridge material, it's all different colors. There's a guy from Greenville named Chris Osborne. He always comes to our shows. He actually published a book. He is a lithics expert. Like, he decided years ago, he's like, I'm gonna learn about this stuff. And he did. And he's from Greenville, so he published typical points. Well, he says it's the Shenango River. But these points are pretty much identical to what we would find around here too. There's a guy in Ohio on Facebook. He's from Ashtabula. His name's Pat Layshaw. He posts his collection all the time. His stuff that he finds around Ashtabula, it looks identical to what we find around here, Crawford, Erie, Warren County. Identical. So when Vaughn sent me that information about the Whittles culture, I thought, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I wasn't even aware of that culture. It's like every time I go online, I find more and more, which is nice because, you know, you could see, you could get more of a picture of what it was like, you know, at any time period. You know, what kind of animals they were hunting. Sometimes, and the whole thing about plants, pretty much every tree or plant around here, they had multiple uses for. Like some of my pottery, the outside has a textured surface. It's called cord mark. And that comes from, when they made the pottery, they would use coils. They would press the coils together, and they would take a flat stone. They would take like maybe even a celt, because a celt would have fit perfectly inside of a vessel. But they would, on the inside, they would put a smooth stone. On the outside, they would take a wood paddle wrapped with twine, and they would just beat the coils together. And then this paddle wrapped with twine left that cord marked texture. And towards the end, if you come up, you'll see the cord mark on there. And I know they use the inner bark of basswood trees a lot to make cordage, but they use other stuff, like they use root fibers, other tree bark. I should compile a list. You can see what I brought in. You know, you could go in a billion directions with this stuff. You could learn about the stone, you could learn about the pottery, you could learn how they use different plants for cordage, food, medicinal purposes. I read something once where there's an article, it had 10 different ways of preparing corn. Believe it or not, you know, the Corn Pops cereal that we all probably ate growing up as kids, that's actually an Indian recipe. What they did is they soaked the kernels in water for a long time, let them swell up, took them out, rolled them in bear fat, and then maple sugar. And it's basically the same thing as Corn Pop cereal. And then there's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of plant roots that they would grind up and make into flour and different kinds of bread. Every once in a while, these Facebook pages, they'll find some article that's been archived away, and they have these different plants. There's even weeds that grow around here that we think of as weeds. They were semi-domesticated by Indians, and they used them for food, either the seeds or the leaves. Yeah, I haven't really compiled any of that stuff. Maybe at a later date I can, but yeah, your points here, like this black point, that's probably Coshocton flint, I think. Chris Osborne, like, he had me guess a bunch of stuff once, and I got most of them wrong, so I'm not a lithics. Some of them that are obvious, I can kind of tell. Like the gray stuff, like this, that's probably Onondaga chert. And a few years ago, one of our members, I'll tell you, if you want a good speaker, his name's Bob Briggs. All you'd have to do is call the Fort LaBeouf Museum. And he's a flint napper. I asked him about Onondaga chert one time, because this gray stuff seems to be the most common material. He talked for a half an hour. He told me how it was formed, how many billions of years ago. He goes, yeah, there's this big outcropping in upstate New York. And you go way up north of New York, and it goes diagonally down towards New Jersey. He said if you find a really big, high quality artifact in this area, he said that would have come from 300 miles away. Because I always wondered, okay, I see chunks of this gray flint in gravel bars around here. I go, did they use that? He goes, I've tried to use it. It's terrible to work with. It's really hard. He said it's very difficult to go into a gravel bar around here, take a hunk of flint, even though it might be big enough, and make a quality point out of it. I've got some of my crude points, I think, yeah, they must have, that probably came from a gravel, yes.
Well, I don't know if, you know, you talked about making them just now and sharpening. I remember my brother-in-law, he was experimenting with making them,
Yeah.
and he said the best thing he found was a deer horn.
Oh yeah, that's, they
And
they
he
use
would-
antler and some use a copper.
He said it would sort of almost hit it and it would stick like or something.
Oh, yeah,
and you could drag it off.
Most of these would have been made with an antler.
Yeah.
And there's guys, like at our show, there's usually 3 or 4 flint knappers in one corner of the building. And they'll make,
Yeah.
and those guys, they can make a nice point in like 15 minutes.
Mhm.
The ones that have been doing it years,
Yeah.
they're good. And I'm guessing the brown is Flint Ridge, but I'm not sure. I did see a map recently where they showed, it was a map of Ohio, and they showed like, there must have been 20 or 30 quarry sites all throughout the state of Ohio where specific types of flint come from. Oh, another common type is called Upper Mercer, and I think it's similar to the black Coshocton, but it's not quite as dark. But I don't. Yeah, the whole lithics thing, that's a complicated science that I can identify a Adina from a Hopewell, the obvious ones, and then there's some like my Lamoka point. There's also a Jefferson County Archaeology Club, and I went down there. They had a talk on petroglyphs in western Pennsylvania, and I went down there and I found this one about 3 or 4 years ago, and some people said, I thought it's a dovetail, and some people thought it was a Hopewell, and then there was another, I forget what, I still think it's a dovetail. And then the knives and scrapers, they're harder. You can't really identify them. But this one, I'm pretty sure is a Lamoka. That's a legit triangle point. That was very near where I found the turtle pipe. This is called a thumbnail. A thumbnail scraper is also a very common item. Probably because it's kind of shaped like your thumb. They would just take a scrap of flint and if it was sharp, they would use it for a lot of different things. Let's see. Yeah, so this summer I got a message. Allison Bird, she is an archaeology professor up at Mercyhurst. I'm going to take my 2 pipes up to show her, and Vaughn gave me a nice different views of her pipe, and I'm going to show that to her. Really nice person. Yeah, Mercyhurst has one of the best archaeology programs in the United States. Dr. Adavasio, who dug the Meadowcroft rock shelter back in the 70s, he taught at Mercyhurst for a while, and Meadowcroft, as far as I know, up until now, this is down in Washington County, west of Pittsburgh. That is the oldest human-occupied site in the Western Hemisphere, and dated between 16,000 and 19,000 years old. And it's below the where it was never glaciated. So and that's a world-famous site right here in Western Pennsylvania. Another interesting thing that we can tell about these point types, we even could get a good guess of what language they spoke. And one thing that's unique about our area here is we're right on the border of the Iroquois cultures in New York State and the mound builders in Ohio. Like Ohio's a complete, obviously most of you have probably driven through Ohio. It's flat, And there are so many mounds out there. The Serpent Mound is out there. Newark has a huge system of mounds that, if I recall correctly, that was at its peak 2,000 years ago with the Hopewell culture. I've been there a couple times, and the stuff that they dug out of those mounds in the 1800s, really fancy pipes. The way to describe Ohio, it's almost like a poor man's Mexico. If you picture, the Aztec and the Mayans in Mexico and Central America, they had these big stone structures. Ohio had incredible mounds. You drive down the road, you see them everywhere. And they have just much more sophisticated artifacts, a lot of stuff out of copper. They would take sheets of copper and hammer it out into things. Now, New York State, also completely different. Probably the artifacts that we find that can be affiliated with New York, those Indians, they probably spoke the Iroquois language. The ones from Ohio spoke the Algonquian language, and they would have been the predecessors to Shawnee, Miami. The Delaware Indians in the east that were eventually pushed west were also Algonquian speakers, thought to be closely related to the Shawnee. But yeah, we're kind of on the border. Like the Lamoka Point, overwhelmingly, that's a New York. It's related to Indians from New York. But all three of my white points, I only have 3 white points. They're all Hopewell. The material comes from Ohio. So, it's interesting the more you observe it and read up on it, it's like putting together pieces of a puzzle. And like when I was a little kid, I still remember my grandpa saying, "Oh, if it could only tell its story." But now, if you just go online or get a few books, little by little, you learn more and more and more. Like every time I go online, just like yesterday, with that info that Vaughn sent me, that added a lot more to what I know. The time frame, it's just, you think about 14,000 years. We've been here, basically, when they had the forts, that's, Fort LaBeouf, Fort Presque Isle, Fort Machault. That's when you really started to get European activity in here. And the history of Crawford County has detailed information about the LaBeouf Trail from Waterford to Franklin. And I've always wanted to get a metal detector because we know where it was. And I know, if any of you remember Bruce Dean's sweet corn stand, Little Cooley, he found pieces of French wagons in his field behind where he grew his sweet corn. And there's a guy from Waterford, Lou Dove. He's since passed away. He was, once he retired from he was a principal at Fort LaBeouf, he published these little booklets about the history of this area. And he was another, I've got those pamphlets, or they're little booklets. He was very knowledgeable, extremely knowledgeable. They might even have those for sale up at Fort LaBeouf Museum. Which reminds me, Bob Briggs, that guy, he's a flint knapper, and he can make fire. Like, I've seen him take a pine board and it looks like a stem from goldenrod, just a dried weed. It's horseweed is what it is. It looks like goldenrod. He'll go like this on this board. He'll have smoke in about a minute. In about 2 minutes, he'll have flames. I've seen him do it. So he's into all that stuff, the primitive stuff that they did back then. And he's a good speaker. Like, he explains things very well. Really knowledgeable guy. And then, of course, there's Leon Briggs, too.
He actually spoke.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Like, the LaBeouf Trail comes up to Armstrong Road there, and then there's no LaBeouf Trail But you're saying it goes
Yeah,
to
it's-
Bruce Dean's, so it's on the other side of Muddy Creek.
Yeah.
So where does it go from there to get to LaBeouf?
I think if you go up Mackey Hill Road, I think it's on Mackey Hill. It would be on the north side, or the northeast side of, be on the east side of Mackey Hill
Yeah,
Road.
east
It's
side.
up, I think up in there. And
And
if-
then somewhere it's got a, well, no, they probably wanna get away from crossing French Creek a lot, right?
Yeah, if you got some topographic maps and also use Google Earth, I think you could narrow down
Yeah.
where it was and take a metal detector.
Yeah.
You would, there's no question, and I think if I remember correctly, it was heavily used for 10 years. And it was like they had it, paved
I
for
figured
those.
the Indians used it probably before, and they probably just
Well,
made it so wagons could go on.
I remember reading it was what they would do because the mud was so bad back in those days, they would split logs and they call it corduroy. Can you imagine all the way from Waterford to Franklin with just laid, but it was heavily, and it said at one time and then they would pack clay on. It was heavily used.
Yeah.
And back then, if something broke down, they would just discard it. So they didn't always have the means of fixing stuff.
Yeah.
So there's no question, you'd probably find musket balls. Well, another interesting thing that a French and Indian War reenactor told me, this is many years ago, there's a guy in Waterford that rototilled up pieces of French musket parts in his garden.
Yeah.
And the reenactor, I know the guy wasn't lying, he knew exactly he knew what kind of musket they were
There
from.
there were several forts in Fort LaBeouf.
Right.
They-
But yeah, the guy rototilled them up right in his garden in Waterford. And the reenactor was telling me this. He said, I saw them. I knew exactly what all the parts were. What became of them, I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot more that went on around here. And I we get, my club, they send out newsletters every month, and then they'll have they'll have charts like that so you can identify stuff. They'll have articles about all the way from the paleo time period up into the historic time period. And all these time periods, they're interesting in their own way. And the paleo is interesting because of the megafauna and the woodland. Then you get agriculture, and there was more Indians. Because once you got agriculture, you got more people. They had time to make the pipes. That's when you get more sophisticated tool making and art. You get the pipes, get the pottery, but also there's more warfare. There's more people, more conflict. Conaway Elementary School over in Corey, that field right across from the school, there's a stockade. There was a village there, and out in that field they found it was stockaded with the boat and I've got articles here and there about a lot of local stuff. I think it was in the Dark and Bloody River. I can't remember if it was in that book or this book, but the United States Army, they had a battle with corn planter Senecas at Buckaloons, right where the Broken Straw runs into Allegheny. Corn planter escaped because he swam across the Allegheny. He had a slab. I think there was a sawmill there. He had a slab of firewood, or a slab from a sawmill. He swam across the Allegheny, had it on the back of his head, and they could hear the musket balls plunking on that slab, and he escaped. Then I think he lived until 1830. I forget, he lived a long time. I forget how long, but yeah.
Excuse me, do you think that we could use the rest of our time to give everybody a chance to look at all?
That's a good idea. Yeah, you can come up and get a closer look, and I've also got a display here on how to determine natural, something that is natural or if it's an actual artifact.